Okay, so we've got a huge stack of articles all about Harvey Weinstein,
Yeah, yeah.
and I think he's a guy that everyone has strong opinions on.
Absolutely.
So is he a visionary? Or is he a manipulator? I
And
mean,
this
like,
is
was he actually like a true visionary who shaped cinema, or
right.
or was he a master manipulator who just like exploited his way to the top?
That's the question, isn't it? That's the puzzle that we always try to untangle here on Grifter or Gifted. And
Yeah.
the sources you've given us really do paint a complex picture of the man. We've got accusations of misconduct from over 55 women, but also these stories about how much influence he had in Hollywood.
Yeah, so where do we even begin with someone like Harvey Weinstein? He and his brother Bob founded Miramax,
Right.
and they were just unstoppable for a while there, especially with those early indie films. Like you think about Sex, Lies, and Videotape. That movie really shook things up back then.
Yeah, they were definitely disruptors. Back then, Hollywood was all about the big budget blockbusters, the big flashy stuff. And the Weinsteins really saw an opportunity to bring independent cinema to a wider audience. They basically created the playbook for generating buzz
Hmm.
around smaller films.
Yeah.
And it works. I mean, think about all those Oscar acceptance speeches where people thanked Harvey Weinstein more than God.
Yeah. It was almost like he was handing out the awards himself.
Yeah.
But, amidst all that success, there were already whispers
Mhm.
about his ruthless business
Yeah.
tactics.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
There's that story about Kevin Smith and Goodwill Hunting.
Oh, yeah, that's a fascinating one.
That really stood out to me from the articles.
So, remember Robin Williams? He played the therapist in that film, and he had a deal
Oh, right, yeah.
where he would get a bigger cut of the profits
Right.
if the film crossed a certain box office threshold.
Right.
Well, according to Kevin Smith, Weinstein pulled the film from theaters early
Really?
to avoid paying Williams that extra share.
Wow. Are you serious? So he sabotaged his own film just to save a few bucks.
That's what Smith alleges. And it really makes you wonder, what were his priorities? Was he really willing to put his own financial gain ahead of fairness and
Yeah.
potentially even harming the film's performance overall?
That's pretty messed up, especially considering how much praise that movie got.
Yeah,
Makes you wonder how many other people he might have stepped on to get to the top.
exactly. And this incident, I think, provides a glimpse into this potential pattern of behavior, this willingness to manipulate situations to his advantage, even if it means bending the rules or kind of pushing those ethical boundaries. And as we dig deeper into the allegations against him,
Yeah.
this theme of exploitation, I think, becomes even more prominent.
Oh, yeah. And speaking of those allegations, we can't ignore them. We're talking about accusations from over 55 women
Yeah.
detailing a range of experiences,
Yeah.
from harassment to assault.
Yeah, the sheer number of accusers, I think, is really striking. It suggests that this wasn't just a few isolated incidents. This is a systemic pattern. No. And when you read their accounts, you really start to see a disturbing consistency in the way that Weinstein allegedly used his power and influence to intimidate and silence women.
Several of the articles highlight some really chilling accounts. Uma Thurman, for example, describes how Weinstein made unwanted advances towards her,
Right.
and it culminated in an assault in a London hotel room.
And Thulman's story is especially powerful because she talks about that guilt that she felt for not speaking out sooner.
Yeah.
She believes that her silence may have allowed Weinstein to continue harming other women.
Mm-hmm.
And that feeling of guilt is something that a lot of survivors wrestle with, even though, of course, the blame should never be placed on the victim.
Absolutely. And then you have Mimi Haley, who alleges that Weinstein assaulted her while she was on her period, even going so far as to remove her tampon.
Yeah, Haley's account is incredibly disturbing.
It's horrific.
It highlights the level of degradation and trauma she experienced. And her story, along with so many others, really underscores those power dynamics at play in Hollywood, where a powerful producer like Weinstein could exploit aspiring actresses who are afraid for their careers.
And then you have Amrabat Gutierrez, who bravely wore a wire and recorded Weinstein admitting to groping her.
Yeah, that recording is crucial because it provides undeniable proof of Weinstein's misconduct.
Yeah.
But despite that evidence, the Manhattan District Attorney's Office chose not to prosecute him.
Wow.
A decision that they later said they regretted.
Hmm.
This raises serious questions about how the legal system handles these types of cases, especially when powerful individuals are involved.
It's almost unbelievable that with such clear evidence, he wasn't immediately held accountable. It really goes to show how difficult it can be for survivors to get justice when they're up against someone with immense wealth and influence.
And it speaks to this broader culture of silence that often protects these powerful figures and allows their behavior to continue unchecked,
Yeah.
sometimes for years or even decades.
So we've got this guy who is a ruthless businessman and accused of being a serial predator. But the story gets even crazier when you factor in his attempts to cover up his actions.
Oh, yeah. This is where things take a really wild turn.
Yeah.
We're talking about Black Cube now.
Yeah.
A private intelligence firm that Weinstein hired to suppress the allegations and discredit his accusers.
This is like something straight out of a spy movie. What did they actually do?
Well, according to these articles, Black Cube employed former Israeli intelligence agents to gather information on Weinstein's accusers. They infiltrated activist groups they posed as women's rights advocates to gain the trust of potential witnesses.
Wow.
And they even tried to plant false information about Weinstein's accusers to damage their credibility. It's a chilling example of how far he was willing to go to protect his image.
It's unbelievable that he thought he could just silence all these women and make it all go away.
Right.
But the truth has a way of coming out.
It always does. It always does.
So after all of this, do you think he was more of a visionary or a con artist?
I think that's the question we're trying to answer, right? And I think so far the evidence is pretty damning, but we've got a lot more to unpack.
It's really kind of crazy to think about how this guy operated for so long. I mean, how could someone so powerful get away with this kind of behavior for so many years?
Well, the articles you sent mentioned that the rumors about Weinstein's behavior were basically an open secret in Hollywood. I mean, there's even a story about female executives at Miramax refusing to meet with him alone.
Oh, wow. So it sounds like there was this unspoken understanding that something wasn't right.
Right.
But nobody was willing to speak up.
Yeah, that seems to be the takeaway from a lot of the accounts. Former employees described this atmosphere of fear and intimidation. Like if you challenged Weinstein's behavior, it could be the end of your career.
Right, because he had a reputation for being pretty vindictive.
Yeah, absolutely. Nobody wanted to cross him.
But wouldn't there have been at least gossip or speculation? Why didn't any of those whispers turn into action sooner?
That's a really good question, and it gets to the heart of the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Hollywood, like a lot of industries, has this history of protecting powerful people. Turning a blind eye to bad behavior was just seen as the cost of doing business.
So basically a culture of silence fueled by ambition and fear.
Yeah, pretty much.
It's depressing. So Weinstein was basically allowed to operate unchecked because of that.
It's definitely not a pretty picture. It makes you think about complicity, too.
Right.
It wasn't just Weinstein himself. There was a whole network of enablers who either looked the other way or actively tried to silence his accusers.
Which makes you wonder how many other stories are out there. How many other powerful figures might be getting away with similar behavior because nobody wants to rock the boat.
Yeah, exactly. That's why the courage of Weinstein's accusers is so important. They broke that silence, and they risked their own careers to expose the truth.
Yeah, it was incredibly brave of them to come forward. They really sparked a movement.
They did. They brought down a powerful figure, and they started this global conversation about sexual harassment and abuse. But it's important to remember that this wasn't just this sudden eruption,
Right.
Their voices built upon years of activism and advocacy by so many women who had been fighting for change long before Weinstein's downfall.
It was a watershed moment for sure, but also part of a much larger fight.
Exactly. And then we can't forget about the legal battles that followed. It was a long and complicated process, which really shows just how difficult it is to hold powerful people accountable.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, the multiple trials, the media attention, the legal maneuvering, it was just wild.
Right.
It's a testament to the strength of the survivors who had to navigate this system that often seems to protect those with money and influence.
Absolutely. And Weinstein definitely had both. He had this top-notch legal team, and he used every trick in the book to delay the process and discredit the accusations against him. It's like a classic example of how money and power can be used to manipulate the legal system.
Yeah, totally. So Weinstein was eventually convicted, and he got a 23-year prison sentence. That was a landmark moment, right? I mean, he was actually held accountable for his actions.
It was definitely a victory for the #MeToo movement. A symbol that even someone like Harvey Weinstein could face consequences.
Yeah.
But some people argue that the sentence wasn't harsh enough, given the severity and the scope of his alleged crimes. And that brings up a bigger conversation about what justice really means in cases like this.
Right, because some people argue that any prison time for a man at his age and with his health issues is a big deal. So, what's your take on that? Is there really a right answer when it comes to justice in these situations?
I don't think there are easy answers when you're dealing with something as complex as sexual assault and abuse of power. It's not just about punishing the perpetrator.
Right.
It's about addressing the systems that allowed this to happen in the first place, supporting survivors, and working to prevent future harm.
So this isn't just a Hollywood problem. It's a much bigger societal issue.
Exactly. It's a story that forces us to look in the mirror and ask some tough questions about ourselves and the world we live in. And I think it highlights the responsibility we all have to create a society that is more just and more equitable.
It's a really powerful story.
Yeah.
I mean, Weinstein's legacy will forever be tied to these accusations. And as much as he may have shaped Synesy, his story also serves as a cautionary tale.
Yeah. A reminder that success, no matter how big, can't excuse this kind of behavior.
So we've gone pretty deep on Harvey Weinstein, this guy who was both celebrated and hated.
Yeah.
What stands out to you most about all this?
It's just so complex, you know? Like, it'd be easy to just write him off as the bad guy, you know, just the villain of Hollywood.
Yeah.
But he also was a brilliant filmmaker, no question.
Yeah, it's like that two sides of the coin thing.
Right.
On one hand, he brings us all these great films, but then on the other hand, you've got all these horrible accusations.
Yeah, and I think that's why it's so hard to grapple with this whole story.
Yeah.
You know, because it forces us to confront the fact that someone can be really talented, but also really flawed.
Right.
And their talent doesn't excuse their actions.
Totally. And what about the women who accused him? I mean, their stories are just devastating.
No, absolutely.
And they were so courageous to come forward.
Yeah, their impact is immeasurable. And their willingness to speak up against someone so powerful really created this ripple effect that we're still seeing today.
Yeah, we talked about the hashtag #MeToo movement, but it's worth mentioning again, this wasn't just about Weinstein. It was about this much bigger problem, a culture that allowed this behavior to go on for so long.
Yeah, the Weinstein scandal was like a crack in the dam, and it just unleashed this flood of stories from survivors in all kinds of industries. It was this moment of reckoning when people finally started to listen to those who had been silenced for far too long.
So Hollywood had to respond. Do you think the industry has actually changed as a result of all this?
I think there's definitely been progress. We're seeing more women in positions of power, more conversations about consent and respect, and a greater awareness, I think, of the need to create safer work environments. But there's still a long way to go, for sure.
So what lessons can we take away from all of this?
Well,
how do we make sure something like this never happens again?
Well, I think it starts with acknowledging that this isn't just a Hollywood problem. It's a problem everywhere. We have to challenge power dynamics, create cultures where people feel safe speaking up, and really hold those in authority accountable for their actions.
So creating a world where talent and ambition are celebrated, but not at the expense of basic human decency.
Exactly. It's on all of us,
Yeah,
you
right.
know, to speak up when we see something wrong, support survivors, and demand better from our leaders.
We started this deep dive asking, was he a grifter or was he gifted? And I think with Harvey Weinstein, the answer is probably a little bit of both. But his story is a reminder that no matter how successful you are, you can't just get away with treating people like that. It's a call to action for all of us to create a better world.
Well said. I think that's a powerful note to end on. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive on grifter or gifted. We'll be back next week with another deep dive on a totally new polarizing figure. Until then, stay curious and keep asking those tough questions.